Hi there, and welcome back to JavaScript Fundamentals. Well, this is day 20. This is the final lesson of this course, and today we are going to talk about event delegation. It's a special way of handling events that takes advantage of the browser's capability of bubbling events. Now, we could use event capturing for event delegation, but once again, not every browser supports capturing, namely the legacy versions of Internet Explorer. So we typically use bubbling. So before we get writing some code, let's have a quick refresher on event bubbling. So let's open up our HTML within the browser, pull up the developer tool so that we can see the document structure. So let's say that we click on the A element that says changed. Well, with event bubbling, that click event will originate on that element, and then it will bubble up through all of the ancestors of that element until it gets to the document object. So it starts at the A element, it then bubbles up to the body element, and then it bubbles up to the HTML element, which is the document object, and that's where it stops because that's as far as it bubbles. So no matter where you click on the document, it could be just over here in the white space or it can be on any other element, the document object will eventually receive that click event. So the idea of event delegation is to set an event handler at the document level for the click event, and then we examine the information from that event, determine the target, and then we can do something based upon what that target is. So let's go back to our code and let's actually write some event delegation code. First, let's comment out all of the other code that we have, just so that we can compare it with the event delegation code. And then let's set up an event handler for the document object for the click event. So we will use our event utility object, add event, we will specify document, click, and then the function that we want to execute whenever the event fires. So let's do something really easy. Let's alert you clicked me, and let's go back to the browser, refresh, and no matter where we click on the document, that alert box is going to pop up. So let's click over on the H1 element. Once again, we get the alert box. So just so that you can see, no matter where we click, we are getting this function to execute because it is handling the click event. So now we need to filter what we do when this event occurs based upon the element that we want to do something with. Well, we have these A elements, which is what we have used for the past couple of lessons. So let's do something only whenever we click an A element. So first we need to get the event target. So we will create a variable called target. Let's do event utility dot get target, and we pass in the event object. Let's also create a variable called tag name to store the target tag name. And now we can use if tag name equals A, capital A, because the tag name property returns the element, all capital letters. Then we want to alert you clicked an A element. But if we click on the A element, it's also going to take us to whatever is specified with the href attribute. So we should also prevent the default action from occurring. So we will call the prevent default method that we have within our event utility, pass the event object. And so now whenever we reload the page, we can click anywhere on the document. Just so that you can hear my mouse clicking, I'm clicking on everything but links, and we aren't seeing that alert box come up. But whenever we click on one of these A elements, there we go. You clicked an A element, and whenever I click OK, then the default action is prevented, so we are not taken to google.com. Well, let's go back to our code and finish changing the body's style. So we don't need to alert anything, but we do need to get the inner HTML of the A element. So let's create a variable called class name, and we want target.innerHTML.to lowercase, and we are already preventing the default action from occurring. So now we just need to do document.body.className equals class name. So let's go back to the browser and refresh. Whenever we click on these A elements, we will get the desired results. There we go. Everything's working perfectly. So let's talk a little bit about what we have gained from using event delegation. First of all, we've gained flexibility because we are filtering what we do based upon the element that we have clicked on, or at least the target of the click event. In this case, if it's an A element, then we are using the inner HTML property and switching it to lowercase, and then using that as a class name for the document body. So no matter on what A element we click on, this is going to happen, which is making our code more flexible, because we can add more A elements to the document by using inner HTML or using the DOM creation methods, create element, and we can add these elements to the page. And if we want those to also change the style of the body, that's automatically done for us, because no matter what we click on, if it's an A element, these 3 lines of code are going to execute. Compare that with the code that we had written previously. We had gotten the A elements using the getElementsByTagName method. Then we looped over that node list, setting up each individual element with a click event. So if we added elements dynamically after setting up these event handlers, we would also have to set up those event handlers for the dynamically added elements. So we've essentially made more work on ourselves by doing it the old way, not using event delegation. So our code is more flexible in that way. It's also more flexible in that if we want to keep this behavior, but not only for A elements, but let's say that we want to do that for button elements as well. So we can do tag name or tag name equals button. Then any button within the document is going to behave the same way. So let's go ahead and let's add a button. So let's do button, and we'll use the text changed -2. We need a CSS class for that, so let's copy changed, and then let's change it to change -2. Let's make the background color blue, and let's make the color yellow, so that's going to be very pretty. And let's refresh. The links are going to behave like they have before. If we click on the button, we should hopefully see the same behavior. There we go. So our code is flexible, not only in that the dynamically created elements are subject to this event handler, but we can also add behavior to other elements very easily. In this case, we added the same behavior to every button element without having to get those button elements and then assigning an event handler for that. So flexibility is the first gain of using event delegation. The second gain is performance, because every event handler consumes memory. So if we are assigning an event handler for every A element and every button element and every other element that needs a click event, then we are consuming more and more and more memory. And while in our case that's not that big of a deal, because we only have a few elements that we want to listen for the click event, in large web applications that is a problem. In fact, I have seen web applications crash because so many elements were set up to have event handlers. So by using event delegation, you set up just a few event handlers, and then within those functions that execute, we basically do what we would normally do with an event handler, except that we write the code to filter out behavior based upon the target of the event. But there is a downside to event delegation in that our code actually gets more complex, because we have to check the element and then we have to do something if the target is that particular type of element. And it gets even more tricky whenever we have something like an A element that we don't want to have the behavior of changing the style of the document, that we just want a normal A element. So let's go ahead and add an A element. This one's going to go to Google once again. And then the text is just going to be go to Google. So we need to find some way to find the difference between the A elements that we want to use to change the background and the text color of the body, and then the elements that we actually want to behave as normal A elements. But if I'm going to be honest with you, this is horrible design to begin with. I mean, getting the inner HTML of an element and using that as a class name, that's just asking for something to go wrong. So a better approach would be to use a custom attribute, assign the class name that we want to use to that attribute, and then use that attribute's value whenever we want to set a class name. That could also be the difference between an element that we want to use to change the body style to any other normal element. And since HTML5 is coming and we have the ability to use data attributes, we will use the data attribute naming scheme, which incorporates the use of data dash and then whatever that we want to name this. And frankly, I love custom attributes, but we've been able to do this for years. I mean, I was doing this 10, 12 years ago, but for some reason when XHTML came out, that was horrible. I mean, because everything had to validate and all that horrible stuff. But the custom attributes are wonderful. So if you can get away with doing custom attributes to make your code and make your HTML a whole lot better, then go for it. So let's call this data body class, and then we will add normal as its value, and then we can change the text of this link to be a little bit more descriptive as to what it does. Change to normal. And then we will do kind of the same thing for the next A element. We will just copy and paste that in. We will change the value of data.body or data-body-class to changed. And this way we can type it all in lowercase, but we probably will still want to do that within our code just to make sure everything's all lowercase. But then again, we might just want to leave that off because we could have a class name with an uppercase letter. So we'll make that change whenever we get to the JavaScript. So let's change to changed. We can also get rid of these hrefs since these really aren't going anywhere and they aren't designed to go anywhere. We can just use the hash. That would be more typical of what you would find within a web page that's doing something like this. And then we need to set the data-body-class attribute for the button element. So we will do the same thing there, and we will call this changed to. Let's change the text of the button to change to changed-to. So we need to go back to our script, and we need to get the value of these attributes. So let's call this data class. Why not? That's kind of descriptive as to what it is. It might be better to be class data. So let's do target.get attribute, and we specify what attribute that we want to get. This is going to be data-body-class. And then all we need to do is make sure that this class data variable is truthy, because if it's undefined or if it's null or if it's an empty string or anything like that, it's going to be falsy. So we can use it as a condition. If it has a value, then this is going to be true. If it doesn't have a value, then it's going to be false. So this way, we've essentially ensured that any element that has a data-body-class attribute is going to have a truthy value. So we need to get the class name, which we already have. So we don't need our class name variable. All we need to do is prevent the default from occurring, change the body's class to class data. And if we go back to the browser, refresh, we should get the behavior that we want. We are able to change these or change the style clicking on these links. If we click on the button, we get the same thing. But if we click on the link that says go to Google, that's going to behave exactly like a normal A element, and it will take us to Google. Well, I've used the click event rather exclusively, and there's many other events that we can choose. So let's incorporate the use of another event called the mouse over event. And that fires whenever you move your mouse pointer over an element. So if we move our mouse over the go to Google link, the mouse over event would fire. So let's do the same thing with the mouse over event, in that we change the style of the body whenever we move our mouse over one of the three elements that's designed to do that. And then whenever we click on one of those elements, we will remove the class that was assigned to the body. So let's go back to our index, because our normal class is representative of visually what's normal. It has a background color of white and a foreground color of black. So let's change this so that the background color is gray, just so that we can see the visual difference between the normal class and then having no class whatsoever. And we need to also get rid of the class that is assigned to the body. So let's go back to the browser. Let's refresh. Whenever we move our mouse over these elements, it's not changing. Did I change? No, I didn't. We need to change the event that we are going to handle from click to mouse over. Now we'll go back to the browser, refresh, and there we have our behavior. So whenever we click one of these three elements, it's going to remove the class that we have assigned to the body tag. And there we go. If we move our mouse over to changed and click, and same with the button and click. Now it's nice that we have this extra functionality, but if we look at our code, we have repeated a lot of the same code. We are getting the target twice, we are getting the tag name twice, which we don't need to do anymore, so let's get rid of that. We are also getting the value of the data-body-class attribute twice. We do the same check for that value twice. We prevent the default twice, and then the really only difference is setting the class name of the body. So we need to find some way to condense all of this code to make it a lot more maintainable so that we don't have to make a lot of changes in between these two functions. Well, we can use the same function to handle two different events whenever we use event delegation. So the first thing we need to do is separate out this function so that it is a reusable function. So let's do var, we'll call this mouse handler, and then we'll set it to the function that we had within the click event handler setup, and then we'll just pass mouse handler. And then we'll do the same thing for setting up the mouse over event. So we'll do mouse handler. And now all we have to do is inside of our mouse handler function, determine what event occurred, and then change the behavior based upon that event. So let's move this prevent. Well, we don't need to move that prevent default. We'll do that first, and then we'll check for the event that occurred. So we'll do evt.type. If it is click, then we will change the class name to an empty string, just like that. And then else, we will set document.body.className to class data. So now we are using one function, and we have set up just two event handlers. So if we go back to the browser, refresh, whenever we move our mouse over these links, you see the same exact behavior that we had before. If we click, then we remove the class from the body back to the normal state. So that is event delegation. It is a little bit more complex, but it allows us more flexibility and gives us better performance than normal event handling. But the choice is ultimately up to you. Really, event delegation in the previous lessons would have been overkill because we just had a few elements that we wanted to handle events on, so just setting up those event handlers was a whole lot easier than going through this whole rigmarole of event delegation. But the larger your application is, the more benefits you'll get out of event delegation. And with that, we'll call this lesson and this course done. I would like to thank you for your patronage to Tuts Plus Premium, because without you, I would not be doing this. And I hope I gave you a foundation on JavaScript and DOM scripting. Whenever I had originally planned this course, it was going to be about 25 lessons long. And then I realized that the majority of my time, and really all of our time, is spent using the JavaScript language and DOM scripting. So I wanted to give you a foundation on just that, because there's many other things that you can do with JavaScript in the browser, but the majority of the time you write JavaScript code to interact with the document object model. So we could delve much deeper into just those two topics alone, and that would take a very long time, not to mention all of the other stuff that you can do with JavaScript in the browser. So there will be more courses courses to come. This is just the beginning. So I hope you are looking forward to those, because I'm looking forward to doing those as well, either me or someone else. But once again, thank you. Feel free to leave questions on the forums. I will be looking and answering those. Also leave some feedback if you have that as well. So happy coding. I will see you next time.